Good evening, everyone. Let me start by saying something that might surprise you. Failure is not the opposite of success. It is part of it. When we were kids, we failed all the time. We fell when we learned to walk. We mumbled nonsense before we could speak. We scribbled before we could write. But no one ever said, "You're a failure because you fell down." In fact, when we fell, people clapped. They said, "Good try," and encouraged us to stand up again. Then, somewhere along the way, maybe in school, maybe in our jobs, maybe even at home, we were taught that failure is something to be ashamed of, that it means we're not good enough, that if you fail, you're weak. And so we stopped clapping when people tried and fell. We started judging. But here's the thing. Failure is the single most powerful tool we have for growth. You cannot learn without it. You cannot build anything meaningful without embracing it. Let me tell you a story. There's a man who started a company in his garage. He had big dreams, no money, and a lot of critics. The product he built? It failed. Miserably. He was told he wasn't cut out for business. He was kicked out of his own company. Most people would have quit, but he didn't. He learned, he reflected, he tried again. Years later, he returned to that same company and transformed it into one of the most valuable brands in the world. That man was Steve Jobs. Now, I'm not saying we're all going to be Steve Jobs, but I am saying that success is never a straight line. It is a messy, tangled, uncertain path that winds through more failures than victories. And that's okay, because failure forces us to face hard truths. It reveals our character, it teaches us resilience, and if we let it, it gives us clarity. You see, when things go right, we celebrate. We feel good. But we rarely stop to question why they worked. When things go wrong, when we fail, we are forced to pause, to reflect, to examine every decision, every detail. That process? That is where real growth happens. Failure is feedback, it's information, it's data. And if we have the courage to look at it not as a verdict, but as a lesson, we begin to unlock something very powerful. Let me ask you this. What would you attempt if you weren't afraid to fail? Think about that. Because most of us don't pursue our ideas, our dreams, our goals, not because we don't want them, but because we're afraid to look foolish. We're afraid to try and not get it right the first time. We're afraid of the embarrassment, of the judgment, of the silence after the fall. But here's the truth. No one remembers how many times you failed. They remember how you finished. J.K. Rowling was rejected by 12 publishers before someone finally agreed to publish Harry Potter. Colonel Sanders was turned down 1,009 times before someone said yes to his chicken recipe. Thomas Edison failed over 1,000 times before he got the light bulb to work. If you ask them, they didn't fail 1,000 times to find 1,000 ways that didn't work. Now imagine if they had given up at the 10th try, or the 100th, or the 999th. The world would be a little dimmer, a little less magical, and a lot less flavorful. Here's what we get wrong. We think failure is a detour. It's not. Failure is the path. There's an African proverb that says, "Smooth seas do not make skillful sailors." We don't grow when everything is easy. We grow when we're tested. We grow when we struggle. We grow when we fall and have to figure out how to get back up. Again and again. And yes, failure hurts. It can bruise our ego. It can shake our confidence. But it also humbles us. It connects us. Because there isn't a person in this room or in the world who hasn't failed at something. The difference between those who thrive and those who don't is not that one group failed less. It's that they learned more. So if you're in a place right now where you've failed, a business that didn't work, a relationship that fell apart, a goal you didn't reach, I want to say this: you're not broken, you're becoming. Don't run from your failure. Study it. Sit with it. Ask it what it's trying to teach you, because every failure carries a gift. Sometimes it's a new direction. Sometimes it's a deeper strength. Sometimes it's just the realization that you are still here and you're not done yet. We live in a culture that loves to talk about winning, success stories, highlight reels. But real life? Real life is built on the blooper reel, on the outtakes, on the messy middle that no one posts about. So let's change how we think about failure. Let's stop whispering it like it's a dirty word. Let's talk about it, share it, celebrate it. Let's create cultures in our families, our teams, our communities, where trying and falling is honored more than not trying at all. Because here's the truth: failure is not the end of the story. In fact, it's often just the beginning. Thank you. Failure is not the opposite of success. It's the foundation of it. This idea might feel uncomfortable at first. We're conditioned to believe that success and failure exist on opposite ends of a spectrum. That if you're succeeding, you're moving forward, and if you're failing, you've gone backwards. But that's not how it works. The most accomplished people in the world, the leaders we admire, the innovators we celebrate, the artists who inspire us, all have one thing in common. They've failed repeatedly, and not despite their success, but because of it. Failure is where the real work begins. It's in our lowest moments, our setbacks, and our disappointments that we're forced to face the truth about ourselves. It strips away our illusions and exposes what we still have to learn. Success rarely teaches, it affirms, it confirms, but it doesn't stretch us the way failure does. When we fail, we're given an opportunity to reflect, to understand what went wrong, and to adapt. That process of learning, adjusting, and trying again is the foundation upon which every meaningful success is built. Look at anyone who has created something lasting: a thriving business, a powerful movement, a meaningful life, and you'll find a long trail of failed attempts behind them. Those failures weren't wasted time. They were training. They were necessary, because no one gets it right the first time, or the second, or often the 10th. The people who succeed are simply those who keep showing up, who are willing to look failure in the face, extract the lesson, and move forward with more wisdom than they had before. The world doesn't need more people who are afraid of failing. It needs more people who understand that failure is the price of growth. We often hold back, waiting for the perfect plan, the perfect timing, the perfect conditions. But the truth is, perfection is just fear in disguise. You learn by doing. You get better by trying, and you grow by failing. Each attempt, each misstep builds the experience and perspective required to succeed. If you talk to entrepreneurs, athletes, creators, anyone operating at a high level, they'll often say their greatest insights came after a failure. Not during the easy wins, not during smooth runs, but when things fell apart. Why? Because failure forces us to pay attention. It wakes us up. It gets our ego out of the way. In the moment, it stings. But over time, it sharpens us. It gives us depth. It develops resilience. Resilience, by the way, is not the ability to avoid falling. It's the capacity to get up again and again with the same energy, the same vision, and a better plan. That strength is only developed in the fire of failure. It cannot be taught in a classroom. It can't be read in a book. You earn it, you build it, And the blueprint is always the same. Try, fail, learn, repeat. So when we say failure is the foundation of success, it's not a motivational quote. It's the truth. It's the raw material from which all progress is made. Success sits on a pile of failures, not hidden behind it, but built directly on top. The idea that some people just have it, that they're born winners, is a myth. The ones who look effortless today are the ones who were willing to fall flat yesterday. And the day before that, and the day before that, every failure is feedback, not defeat. This single shift in mindset has the power to change the way we pursue goals, face challenges, and respond to setbacks. Most people experience failure as a full stop, a sign that something went wrong and that they should retreat. But failure is never a verdict, it's a message. It's not telling you you're not good enough, it's telling you what didn't work, what needs adjustment, what could be done differently. It's information. And when you treat it as such, failure becomes one of your most valuable teachers. Think about how innovation happens. It doesn't come from getting everything right on the first try. It comes from iteration, experimentation, and often trial and error. Whether it's developing a new product, launching a business, or writing a book, the process is rarely linear. What works on paper doesn't always work in real life, and that's where failure comes in. It offers real-time data. It points out the gaps between what you thought and what is actually true. If you're paying attention, failure will tell you exactly what you need to do better next time. But many people miss the message because they're too focused on the emotion. Failure hurts. It bruises the ego, stings the pride, and triggers fear. That's normal. But emotion is not the whole story. If you can take a breath and step back from the disappointment, failure becomes a powerful mirror. It reflects where you are, not to shame you, but to show you how to grow. It's not personal, it's just feedback. The best performers in any field don't avoid failure, they analyze it. Athletes watch game footage to see where their defense fell apart. Entrepreneurs study failed campaigns to understand what missed the mark. Artists revise their drafts over and over, learning what doesn't land before they find what does. This isn't weakness, this is mastery. Because growth only happens when you can listen to what failure is trying to say. In fact, when you understand failure as feedback, it removes the fear. If failing doesn't mean you're a failure, but simply means you've uncovered something new about the path ahead, it no longer feels like a threat. It becomes part of the process. And when that happens, you take more risks, you try more things, you stop waiting for perfect and start learning faster. This mindset is what separates people who make consistent progress from those who stay stuck. Not talent, not luck. It's the ability to stay open to what failure has to offer. The reason so many people give up after failing once or twice is not because they're not capable, it's because they misinterpret the signal. They take the failure personally. They think it means they don't have what it takes. But feedback is not final, it's directional. It's there to guide you, not to stop you. If a plane veers off course mid-flight, the pilot doesn't shut down the engine, they correct the failure, gives you the chance to do the same in your own life. We also have to remember that feedback isn't always obvious. Sometimes failure doesn't come with a neat lesson or a clear explanation. Sometimes it just means you need to try a different angle or that the timing wasn't right. The feedback might be subtle, buried in frustration or disappointment, but it's always there if you're willing to listen for it. That's where self-awareness matters, the ability to pause, reflect, and examine the experience without ego. Not to blame, not to justify, but to understand. When you start treating failure as feedback, you begin to value the journey as much as the destination. You stop expecting perfection and start expecting progress. You start seeing yourself not as someone who has to prove something, but as someone who is learning in real time. Every step, every mistake, every stumble becomes part of your education. And if you're learning, you're not losing. You don't grow in comfort, you grow through challenge. It's a simple truth, yet one most people try to avoid. Comfort feels safe. It feels good. It's familiar. And in that familiarity, we tend to settle. We repeat the same habits, follow the same routines, and avoid risks because discomfort feels threatening. But growth doesn't happen where things are easy. Growth demands something from us. It requires stretch, struggle, and stress. The real breakthroughs, the kind that change who we are, don't come when we're coasting. They come when we're being tested. Think back to any meaningful progress you've made in your life. It probably didn't happen when everything was going smoothly. It probably came after something difficult. Maybe it was a job that pushed you beyond what you thought you could handle. Maybe it was a tough conversation that forced you to confront part of yourself you'd been avoiding. Maybe it was a mistake that humbled you and opened your eyes. These aren't comfortable moments, but they're the moments that shape us. There's a reason athletes train with resistance. The muscles don't grow without pressure. The pain of the workout is what produces the strength later. The same is true mentally and emotionally. If you only ever stay where it's easy, you stay the same. You might feel good, but you don't evolve. Challenge is what expands your capacity. It reveals your potential by pushing you to the edge of it. And yet, our instinct is to seek comfort, to stay where we know the outcomes, to avoid the unknown. It makes sense. Our brains are wired for survival, not growth. But survival and growth are not always aligned. What keeps you safe doesn't necessarily make you strong. Comfort zones are not bad, but they are not meant to be permanent. They are launching pads, not destinations. The people who grow the most in life are not the ones with the fewest problems. They're the ones who are willing to face the most. They lean into discomfort. They step into situations they don't fully understand. They take on challenges that might expose their weaknesses because they know that's how those weaknesses become strengths. They trade short-term ease for long-term development, not because they enjoy struggle, but because they respect what it builds. And there's a kind of wisdom that only comes from being uncomfortable. When you're challenged, you learn about your limits, and just as importantly, you learn that many of those limits are imagined. You discover that you can do more than you thought. You can endure more, you can adapt faster, you can find solutions under pressure that never would have surfaced when things were calm. Discomfort forces creativity. It reveals resilience. It deepens empathy. These are qualities you can't fake. And you don't gain them in comfort. We also grow through emotional challenges, moments of failure, rejection, uncertainty. These experiences strip away the false sense of control we like to maintain. They show us where we're clinging, where we're rigid, and where we need to let go. And in that process, we grow. We grow softer in our relationships, sharper in our awareness, stronger in our purpose. These internal shifts are just as important as any external progress, and they only happen when we're willing to feel discomfort rather than avoid it. It's easy to admire people who seem confident and capable, but confidence isn't born in certainty. It's built through exposure to difficulty. Every time you do something hard, even if you don't get it right, you send yourself a message that you're capable, that you can figure things out, that you don't need to be perfect to keep moving forward. And with each challenge, that message gets louder, more stable, more real. Challenge refines character in a way that nothing else can. It strips away the unnecessary, the superficial, the convenient. It clarifies what really matters. It focuses your energy. It forces you to confront your values and ask, who am I when things aren't easy? That's a question comfort never asks, and it's one of the most important questions you can answer. Failing doesn't make you a failure. Quitting growth does. There's a critical distinction between failing at something and becoming someone who has given up on trying. Failure is an event, a moment in time, a result that didn't meet the expectation. It's external, often measurable. But being a failure, that's an identity we assign to ourselves, and often unfairly. The mistake we make is not in falling short, but in believing that our fall defines who we are. What truly stops progress isn't failure. It's the belief that there's no point in continuing, that growth is no longer possible. We live in a world obsessed with outcomes. Success is celebrated, results are rewarded, and the spotlight always seems to land on those who achieve. But what's often left out of the story are the hundreds of moments behind the scenes where things went wrong, where plans failed, where people stumbled. Those moments don't get posted, they don't make headlines, yet they're the most honest part of any journey. Everyone fails. What separates those who rise is that they don't let the failure become the final word. They see it as a step, not a sentence. Growth is not a straight line. It's messy, unpredictable, and often frustrating. It requires patience, humility, and above all, persistence. There will be times when you give everything you have and still fall short. Times when people doubt you, when you doubt yourself. But growth doesn't require perfection. It requires direction. As long as you're still leaning in, still asking questions, still trying to be a better version of who you were yesterday, you're not failing. You're developing. You're becoming. Quitting growth happens when we stop being curious, when we decide that who we are now is all we'll ever be, when we choose comfort over change or cynicism over hope. It's subtle at first, a quiet resignation, a little voice that says, why bother? But over time it becomes a mindset. That's the real failure. Not falling, but standing still. The most fulfilled people in life are not the ones who got everything right the first time. They're the ones who stayed in the game, who kept learning, kept evolving, kept chasing their purpose, even when it didn't seem to be working, because they understood that progress lives on the other side of perseverance. And perseverance isn't about grinding endlessly without rest. It's about not giving up on the idea that you can grow, that tomorrow can be different, that the effort still matters. Failing is part of learning. It's part of risk. It's part of doing anything meaningful. If you're not failing sometimes, you're probably playing too small. You're probably choosing only the paths where you already know you'll succeed. That may feel good in the short term, but it leaves no room for surprise, for innovation, for discovery. Growth demands exposure. It demands the willingness to look foolish, to be wrong, to try again. And every time you do, you expand your capacity to handle what's ahead. Labels like failure are powerful, but they're only as real as the meaning we give them. If you define failure as falling short, you'll always be chasing a finish line that moves. But if you define failure as refusing to keep growing, then everything changes. Suddenly, a bad result becomes a starting point. A closed door becomes a redirection. A mistake becomes a lesson. You reclaim the story, not as one of defeat, but as one of becoming. And that shift, that mindset, is what separates those who keep rising from those who stay stuck.